9 years in prison was requested by the prosecutor for human rights activist Mikhail Krieger. He is being prosecuted for justifying terrorism because of his Facebook posts. Being a human rights activist in Russia is a matter of jurisdiction. Info, an independent media project, published a report describing the difficulties of the work of human rights defenders in Russia. They are recognized as undesirable and foreign agents, accused of terrorism and extremism.
Maria Bonstler, an OVD info lawyer in Kaliningrad, was prosecuted for her work in court. Defending anti-war demonstrators, she twice uttered the word war. She was fined for discrediting the armed forces of the Russian Federation. From the appeal of OVD info to the UN Special Rapporteur on the independence of judges and lawyers.
At least 10 Russian lawyers and human rights activists are on the criminal wanted list for their anti-war position. In March 2023, the Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation entered the human rights organization Krimsos into the register of undesirable organizations. It was considered a threat to the constitutional order and security of the Russian Federation. The court liquidated the oldest Russian human rights organization, the Moscow Helsinki Group. They also closed SOVA, an organization that monitors and analyzes nationalist and xenophobic activities. Last year, at least 6 human rights organizations were suspended in Russia, info reports. The court also abolished the Human Rights Center Memorial, which for decades had been engaged in the rehabilitation of victims of Soviet repressions and exposing the crimes of the NKVD and the KGB. The organization continues to work and even won the Nobel Prize, but memorial activists are still persecuted in Russia.
In the case of the Memorial Center, it is clear that there is a systematic and consistent persecution of the organization of activists of the former organizers throughout Russia, and recently we had searches, interrogations in Perm, searches and interrogations in Yekaterinburg. On March 21st, searches were carried out at 9 addresses in Moscow, and they climbed as expected into jars or floors, looked for something in the toilet tank, in the freezer, looked for signs of the rehabilitation of Nazism.
Ordinary citizens are also persecuted in Russia. Camelia Slish, a resident of Irkutsk, was charged with fakes about military. In December last year, the security forces searched her apartment and confiscated her equipment. During interrogations, the woman and her husband were asked about their friend from Ukraine, and they were also shown screenshots of posts and reposts in social networks for March-April 2022. Info reports.
In order to keep society in fear here, millions of repressions are not needed here. It's enough just to make it so that talk about it regularly, enough to make repressions unpredictable, when they can come not only to a political activist, to any person, up to the fact that they can take a child away, as it was recently. The worst things are going for Putin's state in Ukraine. The harder the screws will be tightened, and he will come off on his own citizens.
Recently, Russian officials have begun to talk more and more about the need to return the death penalty. Alexander Bastrykin, chairman of the investigative committee of the Federation, also spoke on this issue. He only urged, I quote, to approach the issue of the death penalty very, very carefully. Reported by Serhiy Kulas, Angelika Brushnevska, UATV News.